Hello, saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
The Agile brand.
While entrepreneurs are often lauded with creating new businesses and ideas, it is more often the case that change agents working within organizations or intrapreneurs are responsible for innovation and seeing those new ideas through to completion. Welcome to the Innovation Economy Intrapreneurs Series. I am your co-host, Adam Chen, an independent change management consultant and current president of AmenityLink, a property technology company. In this series, you will hear stories and insights from leaders within organizations that have had the courage to create new ways to move business forward. To listen to the latest episodes or sign up for the Innovation Economy newsletter, go to innovationeconomy.show or click on your favorite podcast app to make sure you hear the latest episodes. And now, on to the show. In past episodes, we've really dug into different attributes of innovation, and the people behind that change. Today, I'm very excited to have my guest, TJ Carvis, who's an architect and project executive with Gresham. Welcome to the show, TJ.
Thanks, Adam. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could start with you telling our listeners a little bit about your current role and your focus at Gresham.
Yeah. So like you were saying, I'm an architect. I've been practicing in Denver for the last 25 years, and I work in Gresham Smith's life and workplaces market, which includes a variety of project typologies, including mixed use, multifamily, hospitality, workplace, and then higher education and research. So Gresham opened their office in Denver a little more than a year ago, and I'm currently, in process of working on projects kind of around the country, but also developing new work here in Denver.
That's great. Well, we've talked a little bit in past episodes with past guests around, the environment in which innovation can thrive. We've talked about that in the context of how the place itself, the physical environment can really impact the people that live, work, and, play in those environments. So maybe we can start off today's episode with you defining what placemaking is.
Yeah, I think in terms of the way it's presented from an architectural standpoint, I mean, it is very much just as it says, but it is the kind of this art of creating spaces and setting the tone that provide a backdrop for life's experiences. And really placemaking is when you think about it, it's giving credence to the idea that people want to be in spaces that make them feel comfortable.
Got it. Is that a trend that is, new in the industry, or is that something that architects have been talking about, as long as architecture has been a discipline?
Yeah, I think it's been going on ever since it's been a discipline, but I would say that it's evolved over the years. Mm-hmm. So we play a fairly important role in the human condition, and our role is essentially to determine how best to create spaces that accomplish a variety of things given a client's budget. So, I mean, for me, it's about approaching design thinking and the possibilities of how the spaces are going to be used, especially today, understanding that we need to provide great design and best value to our clients.
Got it.
So I think just to maybe work a little bit more on that, ultimately our goal is to create spaces that allow people to feel and perform their best in live, work, and play environments. And I think what we've seen over the course of the last decade is that hospitality continues to steer the conversation. Every project that I've been involved with in the last decade has really become more hospitality focused. People have an increased desire for comfort and leisure in every part of their lives. And I think it's important that we start to include that conversation, or within that conversation, that wellness has a place for that.
Mm.
So essentially, my focus has been crafting an experience and doing my best to keep projects financially viable.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So it's almost like a convergence of some of these things that might have been siloed in the past, but bringing them all into one space where people can kind of, I hear the term live, work, play all the time, but that kind of permeates your work is what you're saying?
Absolutely. I think what's interesting, even just from the work environment today, is that our homes are becoming more office-like, and our
Mm,
offices are becoming more home-like. So
mm.
we're 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 trying to incorporate that leisure and comfort in both environments, and I think that that's an important part of the conversation as we try to entice people back to the office.
Yeah. That's interesting. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about, you have an undergrad in economics and finance, I was looking at, but then obviously your master's in architecture to practice. So I feel like your studies at least put you at this intersection to how places can really drive business forward. So I'm curious what's your process? How do you work with clients to kind of unearth what the goals are for a particular space before you really embark on something?
Yeah, I think my practice has always been focused on the balance between the creative and the practical.
Hmm.
So, really trying to achieve the goals that the client sets out in a creative way, but also being very respectful of what their budget is, and knowing that we're not going to be able to include all the bells and whistles into every project, but we try to at least prioritize the best ideas and the ones that maybe have the most value for the client and what they're trying to achieve.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
But I think my background, in economics and finance, I couldn't get away from it if I tried. It's pretty ingrained in my psyche.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Well, I don't think it's a secret that, work life has changed, with hybrid work. You mentioned before, home becoming more work-like, work becoming more home-like. Um, I think a lot of businesses today are certainly struggling to attract people back to the office. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing or some of the asks that, your clients are making of you to, redesign spaces or think about spaces that'll actually make people want to come back to the office?
Yeah, I think our clients, for the most part, are asking us to impact culture,
Okay.
and their goals are to build culture and reinforce their mission within that workplace environment. So it's a different formula for every client that we have, and we really don't see it as something that we look at as a one size fits all conversation. The office is kind of a manifestation of that corporate culture, and it requires different solutions for different companies. I mean, even so much so, two companies within the same industry might have very radically different office environments, and whether it be the most conservative, let's say more of a banking type client, or forward-thinking tech company, it's a custom strategy, and it's
Hmm.
much less a sea of workstations today. It's a variety. It's really talking about creating new spaces and a variety of new spaces with the flexibility to change over time.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So, how, I guess, involved do you get in working with your clients about company culture? Do they come, I guess, on one end of the spectrum and just telling you this is our company culture, bring it to life, or do they involve you kind of in the process of brainstorming and what's that relationship kind of look like? And do you ever have the opportunity, I guess, to kind of put your mark on that company culture?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly would love to be able to say that we steer their culture, but I don't think that that's really the way we work.
Hmm.
I think what we help accomplish with them is being able to outwardly project their culture to visitors in the office, but also being able to create an environment that can impact hiring and retention as well as day-to-day productivity. So it's important that we understand our clients in order to build that culture into the workplace, but it really just depends on how far down the road they are with advertising, let's say, or promoting that culture to both the public and to their individual employees.
Sure.
So
sure.
we're trying to intensify the effort and get people to reach out a little bit more than normal, because the office environment is changing, and we're doing our best to bring the most creative environment, including bringing in hospitality experts to help with that process as we continue to develop their ideas and their projects.
Interesting. So I want to dig into a little bit about, your mention of hospitality, and I'm curious, in the design process, where you're drawing that hospitality inspiration from. Are there other industries that you're kind of taking cues from, or what's your main influence?
Yeah, well, I think the hospitality typology and market itself is pretty forward thinking, and they tend to bring in ideas that aren't yet incorporated into design. They're really always trying to bring people together and create environments that are welcoming, they're safe, and they're comfortable. And I think some of the aspects that happen within our buildings today, whether they be multifamily or workplace, are drawing from those ideas. And those ideas could be as simple as creating a variety of spaces for people to gather, whether that be indoor spaces, outdoor spaces, or it can be down to services. So where we're providing, a level of concierge or a level of front of house meet and greet by people who are working on that project. So I think it varies between projects and typologies.
Sure. That makes sense. I'm curious, you've talked a little bit about, obviously emulating or you're trying to bring company culture to life, right? And we're talking also about, other outcomes. What I'm most curious about in your design process is how do you measure some of these outcomes? Or how do you think about, tracking that we've successfully delivered on the client's goals?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we do is we typically sit down and put together a survey for our clients' employees, for them to talk about what their what's working well, what they would require, what they think would help them be more productive. And we sit down with the client and kind of review that with them, and in the light of everything that we're doing in other projects, let them know what some of those options might be. So I think that conversation is usually happens first and foremost, and then as we design, keeping things, as best we can is to not over survey the employees that work in these companies. Also have enough time to put through some occupancy studies and see how these spaces are actually being used once they're open to the employees. So I think it's an open dialogue mostly that helps to give a feedback loop for understanding whether or not certain spaces are working well and which spaces might need to be improved.
Well, that's interesting. So you're saying that in a lot of your engagements, you don't end once the design process is complete. You are actually there through development of a particular space, and you stay in touch with the client to maybe augment those spaces if they're not meeting the desired outcome. So there's a long life cycle here, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, we're primarily repeat client business. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's probably between 70 and 80% of our clients are repeat clients. And with that comes a certain level of responsibility to provide a level of service. So not only that the projects that we've worked on with them in the past, but also the projects that we will likely work on with them in the future are built to their specifications.
I hope you're enjoying the first part of the show, and I want to invite you to check out another podcast from the Agile brand. It's called B2B Agility, and it's hosted by me, Greg Kihlstrom. The B2B Agility podcast looks at the factors that drive success in B2B marketing, with a focus on the people, processes, data, and platforms that make B2B brands stand out and thrive in a competitive marketplace. You can find B2B Agility on this podcast platform or wherever you normally listen. Before we get back to the show, I just wanted to remind you to hit the follow or subscribe button on your app to make sure you get notified when new episodes of this show are available. Now let's get back to the show.
So I'm really interested on how you think about technology. Design is inherently a subjective process, I think, but we're also talking about its intersection with business, and you can't get away from technology. So how do you think about technology during the design process?
Well, for one, I mean, our design process uses technology from the very start. I mean, we are using more and more AI to ideate some of the projects that we're looking at. So it helps us with creating those initial ideas. But really, I mean, technology doesn't just start with what we're doing as a design firm, but it also continues with the projects that we're involved with. So in the workplace, for example, low voltage and Wi-Fi, AV security, network occupancy sensors, system controls, music, those are all really important functions to what's happening within that building, and they all have to be coordinated pretty well. So with the Internet of Things, there's so many possibilities these days, and that all needs to be coordinated. So our goal is to bring people in, experts within that, to help coordinate those ideas and bring good set of documents to our clients. But again, I think from a technology standpoint, from a greater just design standpoint, we have a variety of tools that are getting increasingly more sophisticated in order to move faster and to bring creative ideas to our clients.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I'm in technology myself, obviously, but technology changes at an ever increasing pace for certain. So I'm curious how you also think about future proofing some of these spaces, if technology really is, you know, kind of ingrained in the process.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of future proofing, I think we see a lot more of just the expansion of and to be able and being able to provide network systems and Wi and whether it's via Wi-Fi or Ethernet, but making sure those routes and those lines of communication are open and able to be expanded. So, as we continue to add devices in our offices, we're needing more powerful switches and computers that allow things to be able to be implemented and added to an existing system. I wouldn't say that people are adding incredible amounts of technology along the way as they go, but I think as they develop new offices and new office spaces within their buildings, that all gets upgraded as we continue on down the process. It's hard to really future proof something, but I think you can provide enough outlets to have enough flexibility to be able to absorb until you get to a real renovation.
Sure, sure. So I'm curious about that because it's you're mentioning you survey, so there's this feedback loop as you mentioned, and then creating flexibility in the space as well. I know something I'm attuned to in my own industry is these office conversion projects. And I know here in Denver, Gensler just recently published a study, I think earlier in the summer, where they looked at something like maybe 20 or so buildings that are candidates, I would say, for an office to residential conversion. I'm curious, just your thoughts on that whole effort. As I learned more, it's certainly much more complex than it might appear on the surface. So, speaking to a professional, I'm really curious your opinion about the viability and the potential success of some of these large scale projects.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of viability, and I think it's a very relevant conversation. Though I think we also need to take a little step back and maybe think about smaller, more bite-sized buildings before we start thinking about the larger, more complicated ones. I think residential to office is something we've been doing in Denver since the Renaissance provided by the Coors Field infill, over 25 years ago. And that was converting warehouses to lots and office space. And I think that continues within the Denver urban fabric without any real hiccup. When we start looking at these larger projects, there are some barriers to entry. I know that the Gensler study looked at some of the larger buildings in Denver. where the price tags of these buildings are still hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think that's a real challenge to move forward with some of those larger projects just from a pure financing study at this point. But we can be thinking about looking at some other uses for those buildings. And I think bringing more schools and daycares and light industrial to some of these office spaces might make a lot of sense. I mean, we're looking at office to residential conversions for a few clients around the country and studying options on that, none of which are the size of some of the projects that were in that Gensler study. But I think it's an important part of getting to a more mixed use environment and invigorating our neighborhoods with mixed uses, because I think that's where we're all eventually heading. Not every project needs to have all of these mixed use components, but it needs to be thinking more broadly about how an individual building can contribute to that urban fabric in our mixed use communities. So one of the other things that I think about a lot is, what does Denver's central business district need? Because it's kind of, certain areas of it are hurting from a lack of occupancy in these office buildings. And that's not only because of the work from home, but it's also, in my mind, that there's not enough people residing in those areas to keep those communities vibrant. So, I mean, my first thing would be to try to bring in more residential buildings into those areas, which would help support the retail and other services that are provided in those communities. I think it's really appealing to contemplate the office to residential conversion, but I think we need to think about it from a slightly different perspective, which is we actually just need more residents. And it doesn't necessarily need to be through those conversions, or that we need to be tackling the largest projects.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, all these factors really play together to drive, the productivity, right? I think that we're all after, right, in business. And, if people are commuting far, if they're coming to a place that's not desirable to work, and they're not going to be productive. So, and, I think Denver's a really interesting case study, and I'm excited to sit here and watch it from close by. So I want to switch, the topic a little bit. We've talked a lot about environments, and the impacts that can have, but I want to hone back down onto the person. And you mentioned earlier that you survey both, pre-project and post, post opening or post lease up or, post go live, whatever you want to call it. What are maybe some surprising findings or some surprising feedback that you find about how people leverage space? Is there anything that kind of stands out in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest conversation that happens is we are providing the spaces that people want to use. I think it's so individually oriented to companies themselves as to what those ratios are for how people want to work. And I think it depends on a lot of factors. I mean, it depends on maybe the views that are offered by particular locations within the building, or the proximity of those spaces to other zones. But what we try to do is look at a variety of metrics, and I talked before about looking at occupancy in those rooms and spaces, but also the retention numbers within the company itself. So if the company is able to retain their employees, we know we're doing at least something right to enhance that culture. But we also dig and use our own offices as kind of learning labs. We're in the process of renovating 5 of our 25 offices around the country, and bringing in new ideas and trying to incorporate some of the things that we might not be ready for prime time to give to our clients as ideas, but trying to see whether or not those can work for us in the way that we're working with things, and then being able to use that and build on it and bring those to our clients. So, I mean, for us, it's, we have certain spaces within our own offices, one of which is called the terminal. And we use that for teamwork settings where We can house smaller teams within them. They can be open and collaborative. They can also be shut down for, private conversations or something where we don't want to work in the open office environment. So I think that what we're finding is that those can also be fine tuned for each individual, community that's using them. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that we're doing that are affecting the way people will work in the future, and we're rolling those out as we learn. But I think the reality of all of the situation is that it's a very custom approach and something that can evolve over time.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really exciting. You almost have your own little like incubator or R&D program in your own office, which is a pretty cool concept.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, and without obviously naming any specific client names or projects yet to be released to the public, do you see certain industries or certain types of companies that are maybe have a higher proclivity to try out some of these new things or are on the cutting edge, or are there some industries that are kind of laggards?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the level of risk taking that the company is used to taking. So a tech startup is more likely to say, oh, that might work for us, as opposed to maybe a more corporate accounting or a banking firm that's still getting used to, casual Fridays. So I think it really just depends. And, people who are more apt to, be risk averse are also more apt to be risk averse in the way they approach the office environment. So, for us, the more creative a firm is and the more forward thinking that they are,
yeah,
the more likely we are able to connect with them and provide them options that are going to be a little bit more forward thinking as well.
Sure. That's interesting. This is just such a great, rich topic to talk about. But I'm curious as well, with the generational divide that you might find in a typical office. Not only is there obviously the company, attributes that might set it up for innovation or something different, trying something new. But do you see adoption to these spaces higher in one kind of age group versus others? Or do you see kind of placemaking as the great equalizer that kind of brings all these people together that might have different work preferences to begin with?
Yeah, I think it's important, again, like in this flexibility and variety aspect of the office, is we need to be providing enough spaces where everyone has a space that they feel is comfortable. Some might have multiple spaces where they're like, I really like to take calls in this room, or I like to get my productivity in this area, and this is where I like to go for my one-on-one conversations, and this is my favorite meeting area. So I think we're looking at areas where it's about creating inclusivity as opposed to just pandering to maybe one particular group. And while I think the baby boomers are continuing to retire, I think that the ideas that were brought by them, whether that be the open office plan or some of the other ideas that are out there, those still need to be incorporated into offices. It's just a matter of fine tuning and providing greater level of options for people. I mean, I know that this is the way it is at my own home during the pandemic. There were certain places that I'd like to perform certain tasks during the workday. So I'd like to take calls at the dining table. I like to work at my desk. I also like to be able to be outside and have the flexibility to take a call in a different location that was perhaps a little bit more contemplative. So I think we try to provide that for employees in the workspace environments that we're working on.
Yeah. Well, that is a tall order, I think, with more options available to folks and more preferences, being voiced. You kind of got to serve them all in some way. So that sounds like a fun challenge for sure. So One last question, and this has been a great conversation. I'm sure we could go on and on, but one final question I have is if you were to give a business leader or maybe a prospective client, one piece of advice about how to think about, how do you get started thinking about creating an environment where people actually want to work in? Where do you start? What's that piece of advice?
Yeah, I think this is it's just going to wrap up really what we've been talking about today. But the most important thing is don't take a one size fits all approach. It's important to perform at the highest level when you come into the office, and a workspace needs to be able to customize for each employee based on their culture, but also customize for each of the company's own particular starting points in terms of where they are in that process of bringing this new workspace to them. But we also need to look at what their individual goals are as a company and being able to provide some level of being able to achieve those goals through the workspace environment. So look, I mean, generic workspaces can certainly work for any company, and we've all probably walked through offices that are, fully furnished and ready to go, just, turnkey, just walk right in. And those will work for most companies most of the time. But what we're talking about ultimately is the goal of optimization and synergy. And if we can achieve that through the workspace, then really we're talking about being able to increase the productivity levels, or at least have them at the highest point, so that really provides a value to the employees, but also a value to the company.
That's great. TJ, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really enjoyed our conversation. And if people want to stay in touch with some of the work that you're involved with, how can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, but you can also email me at tj.carvis, Carvis, at greshamsmith.com.
Great. And we'll be sure to include some of these links and Gresham Smith's website in the show notes. So thank you for listening today. And until next time.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening to the Innovation Economy podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes at www.innovationeconomy.show or on your podcast platform of choice. The Innovation Economy podcast was created by the Agile Brand. Be sure to check out the Agile Brand Guide series of books, the Agile Brand podcast, and other resources for marketing, CX, and other enterprise leaders to manage change and transformation in their organizations. The Innovation Economy is proudly produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, let's keep innovating.
The Agile Brand.
Hello, Saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.